Stand up.
Hey friends, happy Friday. TGIF, am I right? That is, if you're listening on Friday, it is the second day of August, and thank you very much to everybody who joined me at last night's Hangout, whoever you were, and whatever happened. I'm actually recording this opening before the Hangout starts, just before, so I hope we had a great time. We always do. I'm sure we did. If you missed out, I have posted the clip to the Hangout, the link to it, in the subscriber email, so you can check it out, relive it, or witness it, experience it for the first time. Now, I've got Bill Boyle joining me today, Bill B in D.C. Always a great conversation with Bill. Very happy he was able to join me, but even though it's Friday, I'm still doing a news segment. How about that? I'm going to do it for you right now. I'll give you the rundown from the last 24 hours, which was a lot of news. Let's be clear. The U.S.-Russia prisoner swap secured the release of 4 Americans, which was a really big deal yesterday, in exchange for 8 Russians. The prisoner swap involves 7 countries, and it was most far-reaching exchange between Russia and the West in decades. Also yesterday, New York Times investigation found out the top political leader of Hamas, who was assassinated in Iran, was killed by an explosive device that was smuggled into his Iranian guest house where he was staying, and the bomb was hidden approximately 2 months ago. This is some real covert spy shit. It was remotely triggered around 2 a.m. yesterday, and I talked more with Bill Boyle about that. There are 95 days until Election Day, and Democrats began voting yesterday to formally select Vice President Kamala Harris as our party's nominee. That's right, I said our. I'm a Democrat. I'm proud to be a Democrat this year, and everything that we've accomplished both locally, at the state level, and at the national level. Maybe you're not a registered Democrat or party person, but I'm going all in for Kamala Harris and excited to announce some plans as to what I'll be doing over the next few months, over the next 95 days, and excited to have your contributions in those plans. But the party created the process to start the voting after President Biden dropped out of the race and endorsed, of course, Kamala Harris for the ticket. In other presidential campaign news, a group of pro-Palestinian activists are trying to thwart Josh Shapiro's chance to become Kamala Harris's running mate. They see Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, and an observant Jewish man as a face of unwavering support to Israel. He's also for charter school vouchers, which I don't like, and a couple of other things as well. A lot of progressives are not keen on him. We'll see what happens. I'm still voting for Kamala, whoever she selects, obviously, and going all in no matter what. Donald Trump has tried to distance himself from Project 2025, this right-wing policy blueprint. J.D. Vance's ties, however, to the project are really complicating that effort. Kamala Harris is expected to announce her vice presidential pick in the next several days. I think probably the most undercovered story yesterday, however, was the fact that the Senate Republicans killed the child tax credit, which would have brought 500,000 American children out of poverty. The bipartisan tax bill was passed 357 to 70 in the House. Tons of Republicans voted for it. It would lift children out of poverty and spur construction of new affordable housing. And Senate Democrats voted against it in the United States Senate and took this bipartisan tax cut package, which expands the child tax credit for millions of families, and tossed it out. I'll have some sound on that. But I think that's the most undercover, most impactful story, most consequential story from yesterday. It would have been more consequential to more American families than anything else I'm reporting or anybody else is, in my opinion. News on abortion. The Utah Supreme Court has upheld the suspension of the state's near total ban on abortion, meaning the procedure will remain legal while a court challenge to the law proceeds. In the Supreme Court, news, Senate Democrats are planning to push to make the overhaul of the nation court a marquee political issue this fall. The Senate Democrats have introduced the No Kings Act, which would reaffirm that presidents and vice presidents do not have immunity for actions that violate U.S. criminal law. No president or vice president, former or sitting, would be entitled to immunity from criminal prosecution for actions that violate the criminal laws of the United States. I love the title, the No Kings Act. Let's go to Sudan, where there's reporting that experts have officially declared a famine in a city in the Darfur region that has been under siege during the country's 15-month civil war. And now news from the airline industry in the U.S. A new federal policy would require airlines to seat families together on flights without charging extra fees. How about that? I can't believe they separate us and charge us more. Well, now they're going to allow families to sit together. No more family separation on the airlines, I say. All right, a couple more for you. Let's go to the news about the 9/11 plotters pleading guilty to conspiracy and murder charges in exchange for a life sentence rather than a death penalty trial at Guantanamo Bay. This is a really important story. I might dig into this with a guest, but Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and two of the other co-conspirators have made this plea deal. The 9/11 families are upset about it, some of them at least, and I talk more with Bill Boyle about that as well. And finally, right-wing social media posts claimed that a suspected murderer in the United Kingdom was an undocumented immigrant. You heard about these stabbings of the children, but the claims were false. But riots occurred anyway. I was not following this story. Seeking to quell a surge of misinformation-fueled unrest, a British judge on Thursday took the unusual step of naming the 17-year-old suspect in a stabbing rampage that left 3 children dead and 8 injured in northwestern England earlier this week. Viral falsehoods and fears of a summer of unrest in the UK led to this. It's an important and scary story, but one worth following and knowing the truth about coming out of the UK. And how about this story? U.S. border migrant crossings fall for the 5th month in a row. The numbers are down significantly from December, and President Joe Biden's administration has credited a decrease to recent actions that he has taken to tackle illegal immigration in the U.S. And so that's major news and a talking point that Republicans won't have, except for they'll keep saying it, obviously. All right, those are your headlines. Let's see what I've got for you in the order of sound. Oh, this is good. This is Jake Sullivan yesterday in the White House briefing room announcing the release and negotiations and giving background on how it all took place. He gets emotional here at the end, but here's about 2 minutes of it. I thought this was really good. Let's start with this.
The president was himself personally engaged in the diplomacy that brought this about, including multiple conversations with Chancellor Scholz, with the other leaders of the countries who provided some of the Russians as part of the exchange, and most recently, as has now been reported, calling the Prime Minister of Slovenia early in the afternoon of Sunday, July 21st, to coordinate the final arrangements, to make the final piece of this deal fall into place. There is no more singular or concrete demonstration that the alliances that the president has reinvigorated around the world matter to Americans, to the individual safety of Americans, and to the collective security of Americans. And we're deeply grateful to our allies who supported us in these complex negotiations to achieve this outcome. And while I'm standing at this podium, the president is reaching out to give personal thanks to the leaders of Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey. And honestly, guys, I can just say this was vintage Joe Biden, rallying American allies to save American citizens and Russian freedom fighters, and doing it with intricate statecraft, pulling his whole team together to drive this across the finish line. His goal has always been to put the families first, the families who are enduring an unimaginable ordeal. From the president on down, we've stayed in regular and routine touch with them. I spent a lot of time with the families of Evan and Paul and Alsu. And most of the time, as you can imagine, those are tough conversations. But not today. Today, today was a very good day. And we're going to build on it, drawing inspiration and continued courage from it for all of those who are held hostage or wrongfully detained around the world.
Oh, and there was a bit of a mic drop moment yesterday in the White House where the president was addressing the prisoner swap with Russia, joined by the families of released Americans. And he answered a question yelled out by reporters. And in case you can't hear it, the question is, Trump said he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that?
President Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now, former president?
Why didn't he do it when he was president?
Oh, yeah. Why didn't he do it when he was president? There you go. Now here's Chuck Schumer on the Senate. He's a Democratic minority leader in the Senate, and here he is talking about how upset he is that Republicans in the Senate voted against a bill that so overwhelmingly passed in the House that would alleviate child poverty for millions of families.
Thank you, Madam President. And once again, let me just repeat quickly, I'm just really saddened by the fact that our Republican colleagues have not voted for a bill that passed so overwhelmingly in the House, put together by a conservative Republican chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and that would do so much to help housing, help kids and families, and help businesses.
All right, Chuck Schumer, yesterday on the Senate floor, I think the most important story of the day, or at least the most consequential to American families, is that one right there. And I found this bit of commentary interesting. This is the brilliant Simon Rosenberg, Democratic strategist. He was on the Midas Touch Network and had this to say about these developments that we've seen over the past couple of weeks.
Look, I think that when you look back at this magical moment that we're in now, there are three things that really contributed to it. One was the picking of Vance, which I think undermined Trump's ability to gain at the convention. It sort of, I think, scared even Republicans, given how extreme he was. And it put downward pressure on their convention bounce. Two is Joe Biden's selfless act. And three is Kamala Harris, coming out of the gate in a very commanding and strong fashion. I think all of these three things together have congealed into this moment that we're in. But central to them was Trump's picking of Vance and Vance's just outrageous extremism, the crazy things that he's saying, which are just coming. Look, he did a lot of interviews, right? And so every day we're finding new crazy stuff that he said. And I have a feeling that's going to go on for weeks and weeks to come. And there's no way for them to turn that off. And so I don't really know what they're going to do. I mean, I think Trump, I don't think mentioned Vance yesterday at all. When he was asked about him being ready on day one, he gave this crazy answer that VPs don't matter, right? So it's clear that he's regretting the decision. He's aware that it's dragging the entire ticket down. And I think in his own diseased brain, he started punishing Vance by now raising this issue of biracial heritage and everything else, which is obviously going to make this campaign very uncomfortable for J.D. Vance, his wife, and their three children.
Really good points by Simon Rosenberg on the Midas Touch Network. Oh, and I thought I was done with the prisoner swap news story, but I just found this clip of the vice president and future president, and I hope Kamala Harris talking about this, said that she spoke to Navalny's widow today, Julia, and told her the United States stands with all those who are fighting for freedom in Russia. I just want to give you a minute of her yesterday.
Earlier today, I spoke with Alexei's widow, Yulia, to discuss the significance of their release. And as I told her, this being an additional time from previous conversations with her, the United States stands with all of those who are fighting for freedom in Russia. As we celebrate today's news, we must also keep front of mind that there are other Americans that are unjustly being held in places around the world. And we will never stop fighting for their release. As Vice President, it has been my honor to work alongside our President, Joe Biden, to bring home more than 70 Americans in the last 3.5 years. And we will never waver in our commitment to bring home every American who has been wrongfully detained or held hostage. That is my solemn commitment to my fellow Americans, which I will always honor. Thank you all.
All right, Kamala Harris yesterday and last night she was speaking in Houston at Sheila Jackson Lee at her memorial service. I think that's where she was on her way to during that clip. All right, now it's time to get to today's guest. It's Bill B. in D.C. He was, for a long time, a great caller who we love to hear from at the old show on Sirius XM. And when I started doing the podcast, he became a regular guest. Listeners love him. He joins us often for our hangouts, so he wasn't there last night. He lives in D.C., where he's a parking garage owner, but everybody basically thinks he's a CIA spy. Nobody knows how he's so plugged in and how he knows so much and how good he is with history and life in general. We love Bill. He's a really good friend of mine. He's great on Twitter at Bill B. in DC. You can also find him over on Blue Sky if you're on that. Had a great conversation with him about a whole bunch of different issues, domestic and international as always. So let's do it right now. Bill Boyle is my Friday guest. Bill Boyle is back. Really wanted to talk to you about a number of things. Good to see you. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It's a good day. It's a good day in news, let's say. First of all, I don't know if you are read in on this, but just before you showed up, I don't know if you know about this or anything to say about it, but I did want to mention it. The Hamas political leader who was just assassinated in a heavily guarded safe house in Tehran yesterday apparently was killed by an explosive device that was hidden inside the complex, in the room he was staying in or somewhere near it, weeks before he even arrived. And did you know that? Have you heard about that? He was the political director of Hamas, assassinated in Iran by Israel. Many sources are saying now, not that anybody was really confused. More importantly, the guy was like one of the negotiators. The political director was actually negotiating, and they killed him.
Yeah, so that method of killing somebody is something that I believe the IRA started. That's how they tried to kill Margaret Thatcher in the Brighton Hotel back in the day, and they just the people got moved around in their rooms, and that's why Thatcher survived it. Although I think her bathroom got blown off of her hotel room, so that method is actually not new. It obviously requires incredible amounts of planning, intelligence, technical expertise, and everything else to pull off. It tells you something really fascinating to me about Iran, that Israel is able to infiltrate Iran to such a crazy degree and has done it multiple times. They've killed their nuclear scientists while they're driving to work. They obviously, and by the way, that was an IRGC safe house. That was the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps safe house he was in. So this is not just some hotel. This is a place that is highly, highly, highly surveilled, controlled, checked for bugs, everything else, which makes me think that the Israelis have somehow infiltrated the Revolutionary Guards in Iran. Because it's unimaginable to think that some random person got in there into that highly controlled of a place. So, but kudos to the Israelis, because he was not a good guy, by the way, a profoundly bad guy. And I greatly prefer the Israelis doing this sort of thing than a lot of what they're doing in Gaza.
Did you see that the 9/11 plotters, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and two others, finally agreed to a plea deal of life in prison, and that the 9/11 families are upset that they're not going to finally be executed? Did you see about that?
Yeah, and all sympathies to those folks like you. I was pretty close to the events of that day, and I have great sympathy for those families. I mean, it's awful for them. But in the end, these guys are not getting out of jail. They're going to spend the rest of their lives in a 10-by-10 concrete cell. And I'm not sure that that's not worse than just having them end it for them.
I agree with that fully. Finally, the biggest story I definitely want to talk with you about was this major, major story about the prisoner swap deal, U.S.-Russia prisoner swap, securing the release of Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal and Paul Whelan, who had been detained there for years. And this historically complex, months-long negotiation involving more than 6 countries and 24 prisoners. The Biden administration announces it this morning. It's secured the release of 3 American citizens from Russia, including 2 that I mentioned, and a Russian-American radio journalist, all of whom are expected to arrive tonight. And I mean, what do you want to say about this deal and its significance and how it came together, and if you're hearing anything?
So the way it came together is in a way that would have been impossible in a Trump administration, which Julia Yaffe has been careful to point out today, in that to get all of these people out required that multiple countries make deals they did not particularly want to make for some hackers, some guys who were basically murderers, some spies, etc., in Germany and various other countries, and the U.S., obviously. And these countries agreed to do it, in particular Germany, because Biden asked them. Biden had built up enough credibility and enough political capital with places like Germany that they were willing to say, okay, we're going to let a guy go who we really don't want to let go, purely because the U.S. asked for it. And the reason the U.S. wanted all of this is because we want our people back. Russia had, in effect, taken hostages, and you'll read people like Tom Nichols in The Atlantic talk about, Russia got what it wanted here. And I think Russia on some level did. They wanted to get their spies and their hackers and their murderers back, their assassins back. That's how Putin shows the security services that he's going to go to the mat for them no matter what. On the other hand, though, Putin could have just as easily waited until after the election in November to do this. And I think it's very curious, because if he had waited till after the election, that would have helped Trump. Empirically, Trump could say he's not going to do this deal because Biden sucks and he's waiting for me to come in who can really do deals with the Russians. Instead, Putin did it right now, right as Trump is looking the worst he's looked as far as his chances of getting reelected pretty much this entire cycle. And I think that it reflects a couple of things, one of which is I think that the Russians are starting to think that Trump's not going to win. And so they have decided it's time to build up some goodwill with the prospective next American administration. I think it also reflects the fact that they have probably really kind of realized they're never going to win in Ukraine. And that if Trump can't win and hand it to them, they have to start making overtures. They have to start creating structures where they can talk to the U.S. And I think that this is probably the beginning of that process. And who knows, it could go on for 10 years. But it's certainly not a move you make if you're the Russians, if you're feeling strong. It's not a move you make if you think you feel like you're going to have a lot more leverage next year. And so to me, it suggests weakness rather than strength from the Russians. And I think it reflects their expectation of what's going to happen here in November.
Tom Nichols says the release of journalists and dissidents is unequivocally good news, but the grubby reality is that the Russians have engaged in successful hostage taking. Aren't they just going to keep doing this?
Well, they're going to have fewer chances to do this, frankly. They're not going to have a bunch of Americans going there on vacation anymore, right? I mean, you're not going to have easy shots at taking hostages anymore, just like there weren't in the Soviet era. And I think that Tom does not mention in that article anything about the timing. The Russians could have waited. There was no downside for them to wait 4 months to make the same deal with Trump in the driver's seat. And instead, they chose to do it right now. I think that says quite a bit. And I think the Russians definitely took hostages. Yes, it's grubby. Yes, it sucks. But, what did Russia get back for giving up someone like Kara-Murza, who is probably the number one Russian, the most articulate and the most well-known Russian dissident right now is Kara-Murza, and the Russians let him go. He's pretty dangerous to them outside of their country. And there's other people in that group who are pretty dangerous to them who are Russians. They literally let their own dissidents go. And that is not something I think that Putin would do unless the Biden administration insisted on it. And it's not something they would do at all if they thought they had a choice in the matter. Putin was quite happy to let Navalny die. And by the way, that brings something up. Navalny was on the list to get out of Russia.
Yeah, I saw
before he died. That tells you something. I mean, that actually is shocking to me that they were going to agree to that. These guys are dangerous. Russians remember that the Soviet Union came about because Vladimir Lenin was able outside of the country to organize and then come in the country to overthrow the government. They remember this. They know that having a strong dissident community overseas is dangerous to you. And yet they let these guys go anyway. And I think it says quite a bit about where things stand. And I think that the Biden administration flexed a lot of muscles here. And I don't think there's any other way to read it.
Well, let's get to domestic politics. Well, what does that mean then, turning to domestic politics? What does that mean for the Harris campaign, I guess?
Oh, I mean, look what it did. It knocked Trump's attempt to make this discussion make the political discussion about whether Harris is Indian or black or whatever. It knocked that right out of the headlines.
Well, but hold on a second. I mean, since you brought that up, I mean, Trump definitely wrestled the news cycle back with his disgraceful comments at the National Association of Black Journalists. But aren't we fine with him wrestling it back for it to be that? It's horrible for him what he did, I think.
So his game is to say something horrible and then start playing with the message and use his proxies and social media and everything else to build that message up. To drop into the public discussion this idea that there's something shady going on with Harris and her ethnicity. Well, instead, what happened here is he dropped that bomb that everybody recoils at and goes, how gross. But then he's losing at least some part of his ability to push the social media for the next week because this news dropped. And now the media is right on to holy crap, look at how well the Biden administration did. They got these people out. And you're going to now have in the next 24 to 48 or 3 days, maybe, we're going to know who the Democratic VP is. And then that's going to take up another week. And then you're going to have the Democratic convention, and then that's going to take up another week. So I think that Trump was trying to grab the microphone and have a conversation on his 2016 or maybe 1816 terms for a week before the Democratic convention, and I think that got overwhelmed.
All right, so I interrupted you there when I was saying, well, I think you've actually finished that point about what it means for the cycle, what it means for the Kamala Harris campaign, right?
Yeah, I mean, it shows that they are competent and capable of doing things that Trump only brags about being able to do. And It's an easy message to say, and Trump is saying all kinds of wild and crazy stuff online. J.D. Vance is saying, did they accept money for this? I mean, they're just doing their wild, stupid thing, and they look weird and wild and stupid. So it means good things for the, when Harris is associated with an administration that's doing big, bold, and easy to understand things like this.
Yeah.
Obviously it helps.
Yeah, obviously it helps. Now I'm just seeing, just before we started here, I went over to your Twitter feed at Bill B in DC, which I love. And I see this Daily Beast piece. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is likely no longer the favorite to be Harris's VP nominee after his involvement in a sexual harassment cover-up has come to a head. This is pretty wild development. She's supposed to be making the announcement, I think, Tuesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Correct.
And so a lot of people were speculating that that was a done deal with Shapiro, the governor. Otherwise, it'd be a slight to him. Are you familiar with that story? And do you believe that that is really actually a thing?
Well, the hilarious thing is, like, the way that the article is written is it feels like AI, and it also feels like someone writing an article with AI and really desperately trying to figure out a way to make it a relevant story. They threw in there, likely no longer the betting favorite. In other words, it's a story about where the Polymarket or some other online betting group thinks that Shapiro is the favorite. The story, which I think they called it like late breaking, that came out. They said that it was coming to a head. That story was out a year ago, more than a year ago. And it was someone on his staff who sexually harassed someone else on his staff. And the state of Pennsylvania gave the person a settlement for it having happened. There's no question that Shapiro was involved in it. There's no, that he did anything untoward that I know of. And so I think it's just a lot of people are doing their best to create clicks over this
Shapiro's come under fire for his administration's move last year to pay nearly $300,000 to settle a sexual harassment claim against one of his longtime aides. The deal involved a non-disclosure agreement.
Correct. Now, that can mean a lot. That can mean a little. I don't think, honestly, that against somebody like Trump and Vance, it means anything at all. I don't think anyone's going to say, okay, the guy had a sexual harassment case in his office, which they settled, and that really reflects on Shapiro very much. You have with Kelly, for instance, he had a very bitter divorce where there was, questions of whether his ex was going to be jailed and a lot of really rough stuff in that. Does that reflect on Kelly now? I don't really think so. And I think that
Mark Kelly had a bitter divorce before Gabby Gifford.
15, 20 years ago, very bitter. And I think that
did he cheat on any of his wives with a porn star while his wife was pregnant? Do you know?
Precisely. Right? Precisely. Like, once you put these things in context, they kind of evaporate. I think what's happening now is that interest groups out there are very bitterly pushing against who they don't want to be the VP. Yeah. Because, again, they didn't have a convention. This stuff wasn't fought out for 6 months before. Yeah, I'm sorry. They didn't, this is not a primaried out thing where people sort of lined all this up ahead of time. It's all being compressed into a very short period of time. I think that a lot of the criticism of virtually all of these people and some of the praise is pretty ridiculous. A good example being Waltz became the pick of the progressives, right? And it turns out that Waltz actually has quite a conservative record in a lot of ways and is to the right of Shapiro, for instance, when it comes to dealing with Israel. And you would never know that. And I think a lot of activists figured this out in like the last day. Like, the way activists are talking about him, he was the second coming of, I don't even know who, Bernie, when it comes to Israel. And he really is not at all. He's actually been quite tough on people who are, want divestment, for example. and he called out the National Guard after the George Floyd riots, and has other issues like that for people on the far left, and yet you don't hear about any of that. So I think a lot of this is the silly season, and a lot of people are coming up with reasons to dislike candidates. I do think, by the way, that with Shapiro, there's a certain amount of anti-Semitism in it, 100%. And I think that is not, to be clear, not everybody. It's not even the majority of people that are against him, but there's an undercurrent of there that is pretty evident to me. And I'm saying this as a Irish Catholic guy who does not, I'm not hypersensitive about much, but you can see it in some of the discussion. And I'll give you a good example. There is no candidate for VP, no potential pick, who hates Bibi Netanyahu more and is more vocal about it. Shapiro cannot stand Bibi Netanyahu.
Really?
It's bad for Israel, bad for Palestine, bad for everybody. He sucks, he's corrupt, he's this, he's that. And you've never heard it, right? Because it's just doesn't fit the frame that people want to put around it.
Who do you like?
So I'm agnostic about all of them. I would say that if I had someone I would not pick, it would be Bashir. And the reason I wouldn't pick Bashir is it doesn't get you anything, and he's way too thirsty for it. And thirst is a bad habit in a potential VP. I think that Kelly helps you with Latinos, helps you on the border issue, hurts you, though, on labor issues, and again, has some background stuff that is not great, and he's not a particularly great campaigner. I think Waltz is an excellent campaigner, sharp, funny, but I think he doesn't present super well. He looks too old, even though he's Harris's age. And I think that he in weird ways, he's too far to the right, and in some ways too far to the left. And I think you don't want the conversation to be about the VP. I think Shapiro hasn't been in office long enough. It'd be better if he had been a governor for 2 more years, say. But Shapiro actually has quite good relationships in Congress. And if Harris wants somebody who is like a Joe Biden, who can go to the Hill and do things, Shapiro is actually literally a popular guy on both sides of the aisle in Congress. I think he's fairly moderate, and I think he does actually help you in Pennsylvania. I think Kelly does too, frankly, in Arizona and Nevada. So if I had to flip a coin, I think it's got to be Kelly, and I think it's got to be Shapiro. Either or, I should say. I think that the pick has to be predictable and not look risky, because I think that Harris has to demonstrate that she is a safe pair of hands again and again and again and again. And that would be one way to very much to do that. You don't want to pick a wild card. You don't want to pick somebody that's off the beaten track. You want one of the picks that most people are going to be very happy with. And I think that's Kelly. I think that's Shapiro, to a lesser degree, Waltz. And my personal pick, because I'm a DC arrogant, snot-nosed MFer, would be Buttigieg, because I think he would be a great campaigner, and I think he'd be very good at the job. But I think that he doesn't really have a constituency. I don't think him being gay really matters very much. But I think his McKinsey-ish kind of vibe needs to wear off a little bit. I think he is not super relatable, and I think he needs to get there. And when he gets there, he's going to be an absolute murderous Obama-level presidential candidate.
Any chance it's somebody that no one's mentioned?
Yeah, but by definition, I wouldn't know who that is. Right. I mean, it would have to be someone because once you get to the level of who is somebody that would be a stretch? I mean, God, there's 1,000 of those people. Whitmer would be a stretch, definitely. And I don't think Whitmer actually. I think it would be too much of the same thing, and I don't mean women. But she's a similar politician to Harris, and I think you need more contrast.
We haven't talked since Joe Biden announced that he would step down and supported Kamala Harris, and obviously it was a contentious prior 3 weeks post-debate. You saw the fault lines develop, and of course you had the assassination. It was the craziest 3 weeks in politics that we might have seen in our lifetimes in a way. But then something somewhat surprising happened. Biden supported Kamala Harris, and so did almost every major Democrat and pundit in corporate media, and most in independent media as well that I have seen. I have seen almost nobody being critical of this, who prior to this said, we would have preferred some kind of actual competition that unfolded at the convention, a primary, if you will, of some sort. But nobody's really seemingly saying that. Everybody is supporting Kamala Harris. The groundswell of support is like nothing we've ever seen. And that's my narrative of things. And I know that you know some things behind the scenes and obviously have some thoughts about how it developed, but what are they?
So, I've talked to some folks who have a lot more access to sort of how stuff works than I do. And I think that what people don't realize is that a lot of people like Obama, Pelosi, et cetera, really did want a contested convention. And they were really pushing for it. And I think they really thought that, there was going to be sort of the adults were going to come in the room and say, okay, Kamala, we're going to have this person, that person. We're all going to go and we're going to go to the convention. We're going to build up momentum for the convention, have just the eyes of the world riveted on the convention, and then we'll blast through to win the election after that. And what happened, and someone described it to me as almost an Obama level of enthusiasm erupted. And literally just whatever Pelosi wanted, Obama wanted, et cetera, everyone just ignored it. The actual rank and file delegates, regular, people who keep the wheels turning, almost everybody in the Biden organization that I've heard of, they were like, fuck it, it's Kamala, that's it, it's over. And there was such an intense feeling of like, she paid the dues, she's been there, she's fine. Is she perfect? No, but nobody else is. And we don't have any fucking time. There's 106 days left. We have to roar out of the blocks. We need to unify and we need to win. And there was such an incredible amount of pent up angst and fear and remember, people really had a couple of months to worry intensely about Biden not being up for it. And as you know, because you've talked to me, I was not in favor of Biden stepping down until about 10 days before he did. And then you could just see the decline. And even somebody like me, who's not super well connected, but I hear things and I'm watching how every time I see him on TV, he seems to be a little less on it and a little less on it. The minute that it became a week before he stepped down, I was like, this has got to be her. And so it's been an interesting, in the background, someone's going to write a great book about the background of this, about how the sort of big players in the Democratic Party thought it was going to go one way. And the rank and file said, fuck off, it's going to be Harris, and that's it. Which gets at something that I think has been expressed and visible in how her campaign has gone so far. She's got an actual real groundswell under her. This was not the elites picking who they wanted, right? Because the elites, frankly, in the party were concerned whether it would work with her or not. So they were trying to find an alternative. Instead, an actual real groundswell for Harris erupted, which I have to say is the most surprising thing I've seen in politics in a very long time.
Yeah.
And it's creating what feels like a movement. No guarantee she wins. There's no guarantee it stays like this. But right now, it feels like a movement. It does not. It feels much more like Obama. It feels much more like Clinton than it did feel like Kerry or Hillary or a lot of other folks. So I think there's going to be a really interesting story written about this, about sort of how the West Wing idea of making this some big convention, contested convention, was going to be great. That just got blown right the fuck out of the water by regular Democratic, party people. And I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to read. And it tells you something, by the way, about how the Democrats still do work as a party. In the Republican Party, it would have been Trump or a few other people saying, this is what we're doing.
Well, you say still does work, and maybe I would push back a little bit with has started to really work. I mean, Democrats have long been in disarray, and then, of course, you had the last two nominations for the presidential campaign were pretty messy, obviously, between Bernie and Hillary. You saw the WikiLeaks, you saw internal emails and so on. Like you saw, it was ugly. It was really ugly.
But that's different. What I'm talking about is that the party works as a political party. The actual people in party as a mass make decisions for who's going to be the nominee. And look at Bernie's a great example of that against Biden. that Bernie was definitely, he had like a cadre in the way that Trump did. And I don't mean that they're gross MAGA people, but, he had like a bitter, hardcore cadre, but a minority of the party, and they were not able to take over the Democratic Party at all. Right? Because the mass said, nope, we're going to talk all this out. And people don't remember Biden versus Bernie. That was a messy.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
But in the end, you get a consensus on somebody, and that person does well. And I would say, people say Democrats are in disarray. Democrats are in a political situation where the Electoral College and the way the Senate is set up is a structural problem for them that is very difficult to overcome.
Major disadvantage.
And yet Democrats who seem so shitty and so terrible, we keep winning presidential campaigns. We keep on holding back a lot of what could be done if the Democratic Party wasn't pretty good at what it does.
One of the things I've seen in political media and just in general when talking politics with people who are junkies is that a lot of time we're not able to grow and mature and have our feelings and opinions develop. And one of the examples I like to give is, where I started and where I am now. I mean, you've been with me for a lot of the ride. But the only thing I really want to say is specifically, I could say a lot more about that, but many of the candidates that we see and many of those Democrats have been elected, I really like. They're legitimately good candidates and good people, and they're doing very effective work, even in the minority. They dominate the conversation at hearings where they are in the minority and don't have control. I mean, from Jamie Raskin to Jasmine Crockett to so many more, many of which who served on the January 6th committee, which did great work. I would say that these Democrats, I've evolved on the Democratic Party. I think there's a lot of good, young, diverse intersectionality, Democrats, and I'm like a lot of other people, not as cynical. I'm more in a mainstream kind of Democratic Party because I think the Overton window was moved by progressives like Bernie and those of us who supported a lot of that movement. And I think that's important on issues from healthcare to economic policy and education and obviously foreign policy and so much more. So I'm happy with this current crop. Like, I can't believe I'm saying that, but I have been for a while. They get me to stand up and cheer.
Yeah, I mean, no, I remember you 12 years ago, longer. You used to be extremely cynical about the Democratic Party, and I think that's healthy to be. It
was the Clinton Democratic Party. It was very corporate then, and I started to turn when Obama, at least rhetorically, spoke out against money in politics and against the Supreme Court decisions like Citizens United and so on. But this Democratic Party is even more pragmatic and passionate and young and less white, and they're doing really effective things in every way. They're actually
if you look at this VP race, right? Look at how deep that bench is. I mean, we've only talked about the 4, 5, but again, like if we really went to the second tier, Whitmer would be a perfectly good.
Forget about it.
She'd be great. I mean, you could go 15, 20, 30 politicians in who would all be awesome.
Yeah, but excuse me, the better point is, I know you know this, but I want to make sure I mention it as a way to plug what we're doing here, is look down the ballot from local to state elections. There have been so many grassroots organizations like Moms Demand and so many others as reactions to the conservative Moms for Liberty, from the school boards to the state houses. That bench is also very deep with really awesome, cool young people who are putting their name down and campaigning and winning office.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, it gets to the idea that the Democrats are still a party. They are not a reactionary movement, which is all the Republicans are now. And people say, when you say movement, people think, oh my God, this is a huge thing. No, it's really, movements tend to break. They tend to run out of steam. They tend to not be good at sticking with their goals. Whereas political parties that are healthy, they tend to be around for decades and get a lot done. And if you look at American politics, look at American culture, you look at American foreign policy, the small L liberals have won in 80% of things. And the only thing that hurts us is the structure of the Electoral College and the structure of the Senate. If you didn't have that, Democrats would be utterly dominant.
Are you seeing anybody even in media, much less on Capitol Hill, serving in any state house, that is critical of what happened in the process and still holding on to and being outspokenly bitter that there wasn't a contested election? Are you seeing anybody? I'm not seeing, and I'm not even seeing like trolly, lefty social media people or podcast hosts or YouTubers. What do you see?
So the 5 people who voted to condemn Kamala Harris over the border, the 5 Democrats that did, Queller being one, they're the only, which, by the way, was such a shitty.
Queller's being investigated for corruption, isn't he?
Yes, actually. But it's just a shitty and dumb and politically stupid thing to do. They're the only, and by the way, like even the Republicans like rolled their eyes at them. They're the only ones I know of. I mean, pretty much everybody has gotten on board. And again, of course, this is where Donald Trump is so useful to Democrats. He really concentrates our minds.
Yes.
Because we know that he's going to be an absolutely terrible president. And I'll give you an example. Just today, Republicans were leaking to Politico and The Hill. They were absolutely flipping out at what they were privately hearing from Trump about NATO, Ukraine, and everything else. So his own party is going, oh, shit, if this guy wins, we're screwed in Europe. And that's Trump's gift to everyone who does not want to have bad government in this country.
Let me ask you about some of the headlines you're seeing and some of the Republican pundits and a lot of people who support Donald Trump being publicly critical of him, from his appearance yesterday at the National Association for Black Journalists to just his rhetoric, as well as J.D. Vance's, saying, listen, this isn't going to win. I mean, some folks on the far right are saying, I don't think you should do this. This play is not the play, but they are going for it. They are going hard for the birtherism, the racism, the sexism, the misogyny, really hard for it. And I've seen headlines like Trump is off the rails. And I saw, who was it? Someone really smart just announcing today on Twitter, Trump is going to lose. And the changing of fortunes that we've seen, obviously, we could talk about for a minute. But we don't need to talk about necessarily how we got here as much as where are we? Where is he today after the last week, his reactions and his attacks on Kamala Harris, and how that's playing for him across the country, especially in states that matter for the campaign, in terms of winning new voters that he needs?
Yeah, see, I don't think he's winning any new voters at all. I think he's going to press up against he's at his ceiling probably now of 46, 47, maybe 48%. But, Harris needs to win by 2 to 3, maybe 4. Well, 2.5 to 3.5 is what she has to win by nationally, almost certainly. And so I think the race is even right now. Now, saying the race is even right now, though, undercuts how much has changed. I think the Democrats were looking at an absolute blowout against them 14 days ago. So she has pulled even with him for sure. I think that by the end of the Democratic convention, if everything goes well, I think she's up 4 or 5 maybe nationally. And then it's a race to November to see if she can hold it and to see if they can find some way to really hit her. And I think it's going to be a very close election, but I think Trump already blew an easy win. Picking Vance was one of the ways he blew that easy win, by the way. Not trying to be a unifier, which he could have given that speech at the Republican convention, where friends of mine watched that speech, and the first 20 minutes, they were sitting there thinking, oh, shit, oh, shit, oh, shit, he's going to win. And then he went on for another 45 minutes of just lunatic craziness, and that became the news the next day. So I think he's in a lot of trouble. I think that Trump is always at his worst when he's losing badly or when he's winning by a lot. And I think that we're going to see what he's like when he's losing badly quite a bit for the next month. And, my hope is that he shoots himself in the foot so thoroughly that it's over by September. And I think that's possible. I think that Harris has got room to grow. And I think that he is sort of stuck where he is. So is it hers to lose? No, it's going to be an easy race. But I think she's really got a really profoundly big opportunity right in front of her. And I think so far, I can't think of a misstep she's made so far. And that is pretty good for someone who got effectively thrown into a presidential campaign with about 4 hours notice.
Do you think they debate?
I think they debate if Trump is losing. I think he has to debate, and he will. I think if he's up by 5, then he just says, fuck it, I'm not debating. I think people are misunderstanding him if they think that he is intimidated by her. I think he should be, to be clear. But he's the kind of guy who would look at her and think, woman, black, I know how to deal with this. His problem is that confidence will be fatal in the way that it was fatal the other day in front of the black journalists meeting, because he'll go out there and talk like that, and a lot of people will be like, fuck, this guy's awful. Right. And that, by the way, is a thing that I've been hearing from conservatives I've talked to people who voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020 who are not now voting for him. And in 2 cases, the reason they decided not to vote for him, ironically enough, was the debate against Biden a couple of weeks ago. Because the one guy said to me, it was great. And this guy's businessman, very conservative. But he said, I was sitting there watching this, and every time Biden spoke, I cringed because it was like, man, this guy's just past it. It's done. This is like watching a puppy be beaten up. And I can't vote for him. But then he said, then Trump would talk, and I would think, you dirty, nasty son of a bitch. You're an awful, immoral, terrible guy. And I can't talk myself anymore into voting for you.
Huh.
And that particular guy who has voted Republican his entire life is going to vote for Kamala Harris in November. For the first time in his life, voting Democrat.
Wow.
Because Trump just disgusts him so much. I will point out, by the way, another thing that conservatives I know talk about all the time is 2025. Project 2025. That has legs beyond what I think people understand.
No, I think we're starting to understand pretty well. And I think a lot about how popular it has been made and how familiar your average American has started to become with it. I mean, if you pay attention to TikTok, it's everywhere. And people have found out ways to explain the different parts of it very easily. And I don't think we've ever had something like this to motivate us, a blueprint like this to motivate us as Democrats. So I think I don't know if it's being underscored or underplayed. It's working.
I think it's underscored and underplayed.
They're running from it. They just fired the guy who created it, right? Like they're trying to hide it now.
Right. Well, it's being underplayed, I think, in the effect it's having on conservatives. I think a lot of conservatives are seeing that and going, oh, shit, that's weird and bad. And I think that, the way that I tell people is it's one thing if you think this guy is going to limit Roe versus Wade. It's another thing if he puts out a 900-page book that talks about getting rid of contraception. And that's the mistake they made. They the Nazis themselves did not say, hey, we're going to kill all the Jews in 1933. They eased people into their craziness and their nastiness. These guys were crazy enough to put it in a book. And by the way, I mean, do you think it's lost on anyone that the Trump people said, we're rejecting your Project 2025 so much that, oh, by the way, you need to fire the guy in charge of it and put our guy in charge of it. Like, that's not lost on anybody. Everybody knows what it is and that it's going to be their people who are pushing it. And by the way, J.D. Vance being his VP underlines that even more. So I think it's a big deal. I think it's going to be a low salience, high importance development of this campaign.
What do you want to say about J.D. Vance?
I mean, God love him. He just is a gift to the Democratic gods. You know about the couch meme, I'm sure. Has anyone discussed that?
He mentioned the other night at a rally, he said something and he's like, if I did that, my wife would make me sleep on the couch. And it was just like, what are you doing?
As a comedian, did he bomb terribly saying that? Like, it looked just awful.
I think I just read it. But I've been watching him bomb. Sometimes you can't tell because sometimes the audience is just not mic'd and it looks like somebody's bombing, but.
Yeah. So I think that J.D. Vance is a pick you make when you think that you need Peter Thiel and Elon Musk's money.
Yeah.
And when your kids Trump is getting older and slower himself, and his kids convince him, oh, this is a guy who will carry the water for you and be out there fighting for you. The problem with Vance is he is a deeply unappetizing character who himself compared Trump to Hitler and compared Trump to all kinds of terrible, said Trump was cultural heroin or fentanyl. Like, you're picking a guy who just described you as Satan and Hitler rolled into one. And now that's going to be out there. And you see it, by the way, everywhere. The conservative guys I talk to talk about it being out there all the time. Like, conservatives going, why did he pick J.D. Vance? He hates Trump. Right. So it doesn't win you anybody. And it's just another weird hypocritical, edgelord from the weird online world that a lot of Trumpers are in. So, I mean, God love him. And by the way, I don't think Trump can afford to fire him. I think he's stuck with him now.
We'll see about that. I mean,
Trump is stupid. I'm just wondering if he's that stupid, because remember, Trump's all about infallibility and strength. And if he fires Vance, Democrats are going to look at this clown. He's going to bring roll in some other idiot to do this. Like, he obviously is bad at what he does. He can't even pick a VP candidate. I mean, by the way, if he picks Nikki Haley, they go, how long has she been Indian? Right? Like, the jokes tell themselves. I'm sorry.
She changed her name to Nikki so that she was no longer Indian. Precisely.
Yeah. So I think that they have really taken a winnable election and made it quite winnable for the Democrats. And I think that's where we are right now.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear you think that, and I will let you go on that unless there's anything else. Really, really interesting. Always good. Love it.
Thank you, brother. I won't be with your clan this evening, so I wish you all the best. I'm going to be out. Yeah, I'm going to be out drinking beer and talking about this election with a couple of people.
All right. Well, if you learn anything, come back here and tell us.
I will, sir.
All right, that's it. Bill Boyle, everybody. Thank you very much. Go let him know that you heard him here on the show. If you are not already a paid subscriber, what are you doing? Sign up now. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Thanks to everybody who was at the Hangout last night. You can always hang out in the Discord platform, which means you're never alone if you're a stand-up with Pete Dominick community member. And I should be posting something for tomorrow, a Saturday show. I've got some stuff brewing. We'll see. Maybe, maybe not. But it'll be there. If you're a subscriber, it'll come right to you. You guys are the best. So is John Carroll, who writes all the music for this show. He's got a brand new song out, by the way, which everyone should go to johncarroll.org and buy. And I'm going to debut that very soon. I got to get together with John and figure out how we should do it. But check it out. It's called Paint That Dollar Red, and you can go buy it right now at johncarroll.org. All right, that's it. Take it away, Johnny. Boy, you better stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance
for wanting to try. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.